Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Star Trek Beyond. The thing with this Star Trek reboot franchise is, as much as I like the cast and like certain elements of these movies, I never completely love any of these movies. And I always feel like there's a lot they do right. There's sometimes a serious amount that they do very wrong. I've never come out of any of the reboot franchise films and went, that's fantastically flawless. I always think that they're kind of getting there, that they've done certain things that I like, that the Enterprise cast is amazing, that they can be very exciting, that they can be very thrilling, that they can be fun to see with an audience, but they've never really given me that amazing Star Trek sequel that I kind of hoped that they would after the 2009 film, and even that one wasn't even perfect. And although Star Trek Beyond is probably the closest of the Star Trek reboot franchise to a actual Star Trek movie, the others with J.J. Abrams running around the ship and lens flare things and everything like that, all of that isn't really in this. This is actually kind of a slower paced in terms of when it's at least doing its character moments and its action sequences. It certainly isn't. It feels more like that kind of older blockbuster that we were kind of more used to from the original Star Trek movie franchise or even the TV show. And that's something I kind of was missing from my Star Trek movies. I like the kind of idea of having a sexier, more fun, more thrilling Star Trek movie, but as a way to kind of course correct after the big mistake that was Star Trek Into Darkness, I think this is a nice course correction, but it's not a perfect course correction. It's not the one that's going to rebound the franchise. It definitely brings it back and gives a really good entry, and probably one that I don't know if it's as good as the first one, but maybe is closer. So I guess it's second of the three, but it's not one of the best Star Trek movies. I don't think any of these could be as high up there as maybe Paramount and as maybe the people who are making these films would like, although it is actually nice to see a fan of Star Trek in the director's chair with Justin Lin. But as I'm watching Star Trek Beyond, I kind of wonder, like, well, what is our relationship with this franchise? Are we really just going to see it because of brand recognition, because we like these actors, or are we going to see them because we actually like these movies? And as I was leaving Star Trek Beyond, I really started to question how much I actually liked this reboot franchise. After being on 3 years of the 5-year mission, which is apparently kind of a joke because Star Trek, the original series, got canceled in its third season, haha, hilarious. But the Enterprise has been going, and they decide to stop at a space station to give everyone some leave, a space station called Yorktown, which was apparently the original name of the Enterprise. It also makes me think of Hamilton, but whatever. But they stop there and find out there's a ship in distress, so they go to this planet where they cannot radio because of some asteroid nebula type field thing, and then the Enterprise is attacked and they're stuck on an island as the various crew of the Enterprise are strewn about this planet, and as Chekhov and Kirk are split into two and McCoy and Spock are paired together, and they all have to come back together and hopefully fight this evil alien menace and get help from an alien woman who lives on the planet who is technically gifted to try to fight back against these aliens and try to tell the Federation before these aliens can do their evil plan against the Federation themselves, just like they did to the Enterprise after they destroyed it and stranded everyone on the strange planet. This is directed by Justin Lin, who, if you're not familiar with him, he's basically the director that took Fast and the Furious and changed it from a dumb movie with car racing into, well, I guess he didn't change that, but he changed it from being a silly franchise that no one thought could live on as long as it has into the film franchise that is a major blockbuster to this day. He's the one who directed Fast 5 and Fast and Furious 6 and Tokyo Drift. He was always really good at working with an ensemble cast. Although Star Trek movies are usually kind of about Kirk and a bunch of other jerks, it's never really about the entire crew. It's always like Kirk is the main point and everyone else is secondary. It's certainly the way this film is written. I think Justin Lin is really good at splitting the difference of the story throughout this film. Justin Lin's really good at having individual character moments. He's really good at having all these guys solve a mystery together because they have to figure out what this alien evil guy is up to and what his evil plan is. And it especially reminds me of what Justin Lin did with like Fast 5, where he has the various members of the Toretto family trying to find out information about someone. And I think Justin Lin is actually perfect to make this kind of a Star Trek Trek movie. And I think it reminds you certainly more of the original series or Next Generation and feels a little less like a movie, but it still to me feels like kind of the original cast movies. But it definitely, the way it flows and the whole idea of the story definitely reminds you more of the TV show, which is interesting since this cast is the only Star Trek film franchise cast to only be in movies and never be from a TV show first. It's interesting to see them take on a more TV-centric idea, and even the best of the original movies played better on TV and played like the original series. So at least Justin Lin understood what makes a good Star Trek movie work, and I think that's really where this film is at its best. But you'd think, you know, since he's the Fast and Furious guy, the action stuff, and he'd probably speed things up more than Abrams would, but he kind of has a totally different flow from Abrams, which I very much like. After the whole Into Darkness thing, which this film very much feels like a kind of soft reboot or a course correction, which is kind of funny since Into Darkness was kind of trying to redo the first Star Trek film, which was trying to do a course correction, which was Wrath of Khan. And it's also funny since Abrams was brought in similar as a way as Nicholas Meyer was, as someone who was not connected with Star Trek, who was just more focused on making a good movie, whereas Justin Lin is a Star Trek fan, course correcting from someone who wasn't a Star Trek fan to someone who is a Star Trek fan. I think that really works for this film. Those are the best moments of it. The action sequences are a little more incoherent and don't have the geography that you really expect from Justin Lin. I think he got away with a lot in the Fast and the Furious films, where he'd do things that were completely unbelievable but a lot of fun, and a lot of the battle sequences between ships in Star Trek movies aren't really supposed to be as fun as Fast and Furious films, so it felt like he couldn't adapt as well to that. And even the fight sequences, he'd have the camera moving around like the fight was amazing. And there's one part where the girl alien is fighting with this guy, and I realize like she's acting like it's a really tense fight, but she's the only one punching, and the camera's acting like it's tense, but it was like not actually that remarkable of a fight itself. He just shot it really well, which is interesting because most of the time they just have a lot of cutting in things, but he actually clearly knows how to shoot an action movie, so he just like gave it that kind of a cinematography, and you can almost believe it. But then I was like, wait a minute, this fight sucks. Star Trek movies are not known for their fight choreography, so I guess I can't blame him for that one. I kind of like his spin on a Star Trek film. I think it's kind of interesting to see a franchise that is so known for J.J. Abrams take a detour from what he did with it. It'll be interesting to see what Rian Johnson did with Star Wars as well. And obviously kind of Mission Impossible got a lot better after Brad Bird came in, and I think he's good at setting up franchises. He's clearly not as good at following up with them, but he's really good at setting them up for someone else to do something interesting with. However, I think this film has a major problem, which is its villain, played by Idris Elba. I don't understand why you'd hire Idris Elba, someone as handsome as Idris Elba and someone whose face is so charismatic as Idris Elba, and cover him in prosthetics. It's as bad of a decision as having Oscar Isaacs play Apocalypse and covering him with lots of prosthetics. I just really don't get it, and I don't think anyone gets it. But that villain is like an afterthought, and it is kind of like a film that I just reviewed, Search for Spock. This isn't because I'm trying to pimp my review, but it's also to say that the problem with Search for Spock is it's more about Kirk and the Enterprise and not enough about the villain. Although most movie sequels end up being more about the villain, that film isn't. And Star Trek Beyond is a little more about the people on the Enterprise than it is about the villain, but they still wrote the villain like you're supposed to care about him, like he's the main focus, like this is a typical sequel where the villains become more important, but it doesn't actually do that, but it still writes the villain like he is in one of those, so you're just like, what? Because you never really care about him. That's one of the bigger problems with these Star Trek films, is you never really get a great villain. And certainly I'm sure everyone who plays a villain is screaming Khan at the top of their lungs because they wish they could do something as cool as Ricardo Montalban. And this villain, it just didn't really work, and the whole reveal of him didn't work, and it was a lot better when it was doing the character moments. That's when this film really worked. A lot of that might be because this film was written by Simon Pegg and Doug Zhang, who I'm not really familiar with his work. I am familiar with Simon Pegg's work, and there's certain sequences, particularly the opening sequence, that feel very Simon Pegg. And I think he does a good job with really writing a Star Trek movie. I mean, this really is the most Star Trek I think these rebooted franchises have been, and a lot of that has to do with the screenplay, and I really like that about this film. This franchise, because we have so long between each entry, longer than the original series entry. They take a while to come out, and then I suddenly have to remember them. It's not like I had a TV show to build up those relationships with, and it almost feels like I'm not really connecting with them as well. This is the first film where I'm really getting good, honest, kind of typical Star Trek character development, and this is the third movie. I should have gotten a little more of that in the second film instead of doing that weird con thing that didn't work or whatever. I wish Star Trek movies had more more of that kind of character stuff like this one did. That's when this one really sings, and it reminds me of kind of like old westerns and old western TV shows, and I think Star Trek kind of did that in some regard, or just old TV show dramas. They'd mainly be character pieces with a few action set pieces in them, and Star Trek very much was a part of that tradition as well, and Star Trek Beyond lives on that tradition. It doesn't really work in the action sequences as well as the character development, but it made me really like them. You know, you have all these charismatic actors, why don't we see them try to, you know, act and shit? Chris Pine is just as charismatic as he's ever been. I don't like Zachary Quinto as much as I usually do, but he was still good. Everyone was pretty good. Anton Yelchin, I never liked his Russian accent, although he is Russian, so it just sounds super cheesy, but I like him as an actor, and I think he did his best performance as Chekhov. Regardless of this being his last Star Trek film, I still would have said that. There wasn't really enough Sulu, although I liked John Cho being able to captain the ship and doing certain sequences. There didn't feel enough, and Uhura felt a little maligned as well. That kind of happens, especially with the character of Uhura, unfortunately. Star Trek Beyond is still a really fun Star Trek film, but as for right now, it's kind of the best sequel of the reboot franchise. I think overall, I like certain elements, and I like its Star Trekkiness, and I like that Justin Lin did a different thing and didn't have the running through the hallways and didn't keep up the J.J. Abrams thing. I think this film wouldn't work as well, and I don't think I'd really want to see a sequel that kept up the lens flares and the running through the halls and moving the camera around and trying to make it as exciting as possible. I don't think Justin Lin needed that, because to him, Star Trek being Star Trek was cool enough. But I think when I'm watching the reboot franchise, I just keep thinking, like, is these kind of fine movies that still have problems, particularly with the villains, particularly in this film with the action sequences not being as well shot and being kind of confusing. I was like, what the hell's going on? Where's this person? I'm like not connecting as much as I am when they're all talking to one another and when they're trying to survive on this alien planet. And it's interesting that Justin Lin, he's well known for his ridiculous action sequences, that would actually be the weakest part of this film, but it just feels like every time, like, even though I love the opening sequence to Star Trek Into Darkness, it's actually really well done. I really don't like the end and the whole Khan thing in that film, and same with the 2009 Star Trek. By the end, I'm kind of a little sick of it, and as I think about this franchise, there's never one that I'm like completely sold on the story. They usually fall apart towards the end. There's usually something where it's like, and this was what it was about, and I'm like, oh, fuck you, seriously? Like, I was with you, I was totally with you until this part, and you kind of ruined it for me. And I think Star Trek Beyond has enough good moments. I mean, it's not as bad as the Star Trek Into Darkness ending, but it feels like all these films towards the end kind of start to fall apart, and I start to question, like, this has happened a third time, and I'm not completely sold on these movies, really. I wish maybe this cast had a TV show to do, and I'm excited for the new Star Trek TV show. I think Star Trek Beyond just continues as good as this franchise can get, and especially because when you think about, like, this group and this franchise didn't have a TV show, whereas Next Generation and the original series had good stories before they even made a movie. This reboot cast and this whole reboot idea didn't have that. That hasn't happened yet, and I feel like I'm still waiting, and it's been 3 movies, and maybe there'll be a 4th one, and then that'll be it, and I wouldn't have gotten an amazing story from them. I don't think I'm being picky and I'm being too hard on them. I think I'm saying, like, look, you live in this grand tradition. There's many TV shows, there's been all these movies, you have all this talent, you have Simon Pegg writing, you have Justin Lin, who's one of the best blockbuster filmmakers, particularly with an ensemble and particularly with a diverse cast. He's always amazing at that. These are produced by J.J. Abrams. You have all this talent behind it, and yet I still haven't seen that classic, amazing reboot Star Trek franchise entry that I could put with the best of the original cast movies, or the best of just Star Trek stories, and they haven't even come close to that ever. They've been entertaining, they've been fine as a big blockbuster Star Trek movie, and maybe that's all they're trying to be, and maybe I should be fine with that. But when I was watching this and watched this actually be a Star Trek film and flow like a Star Trek film, I found that to be a really awesome thing, and I wish more Star Trek movies weren't so embarrassed about being Star Trek movies, because that's why we all loved it in the first place, and that's what I love about the parts that are cool about this movie when it's pure Star Trek. And also, the reboot franchise tries to do way too much, like blow up Vulcan, destroy the Enterprise. They always got to do something big and dramatic. It's like, Jesus, I get it's a movie, okay? And I kind of maybe wish they'd reined it in more, and I think that's kind of what works so well with Justin Lin's Star Trek, is that he understands how to rein it in and really make it a Star Trek kind of a story. It's just kind of a Star Trek kind of a story filtered through these reboot films, and these reboot films are good, they're fine, they're entertaining, but they're not really great. And I think when we're looking back and evaluating Star Trek as an entire franchise, these reboot films will never be at the top tier of of what a Star Trek feature film or even a Star Trek story can do, and that still leaves me feeling a little disappointed, even if I am happy with the direction that this film took. So if you have seen Star Trek Beyond and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.